The year is 2550 BC. The place is the construction site of the Great Pyramid of Khufu on the Giza Plateau in Egypt. The sun has been beating down for hours. The temperature is 120 degrees Fahrenheit. A man named Ini is part of a crew hauling a 2.5-ton limestone block up a ramp. He is a stone hauler, one of thousands of workers at this site. Before his crew begins pulling the block, Ini does something that will preserve his name for 4,500 years. He carves into the stone. The inscription reads in hieratic script, Ini the stone hauler, year 23 of Khufu. He carves his name because he wants to be remembered. He wants the gods to know he helped build a pyramid. He wants his family to know he served the pharaoh. He believes this work will earn him a place in the afterlife. 3 hours later, Ini is dead. The ropes pulling the block snap. The block rolls backward down the ramp. Ini cannot get out of the way fast enough. The 2.5-ton limestone block crushes his legs. He screams. His crew members try to pull him free, but the block is too heavy. The foreman walks over, assesses the situation, and gives an order. Drag him to the side. The ramp must be cleared. Get back to work. 2 workers grab Ini by the arms and drag him off the ramp. They leave him in the shade of an unfinished wall. No physician comes, no priest comes, no treatment is given. Ini lies there for 3 days, his legs crushed, in unimaginable pain, slowly dying from internal bleeding and infection. On the 3rd day, he stops breathing. His body is wrapped in cheap linen and carried to a mass grave at the edge of the workers' village. He is buried with 47 other workers who died that month. No tomb. No grave goods. No elaborate funeral. Just a shallow pit in the sand. Ini was 24 years old. He left behind a wife and 2 young children. His name survives because he carved it into the block that killed him. That block is still part of the Great Pyramid today, somewhere in the interior passages, bearing the name of a man who died building a monument to someone else's immortality. Ini is one name we know, but he is one of an estimated 100,000 workers who built the Great Pyramid over 20 years. And he is one of an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 workers who died during that construction. This is the story of what the pharaohs of Egypt did to the workers who built the pyramids. This is not the Hollywood version with Hebrew slaves being whipped by cruel overseers. That story is wrong. The truth is more complex, more interesting, this and in some ways more tragic, because many of the workers who died building the pyramids volunteered. They believed they were serving the gods. They believed their labor would earn them eternal life. They worked willingly, and they died by the thousands for a promise of paradise that never came. This is documented history from ancient Egyptian papyrus records, from the writings of Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in 450 BC, and interviewed Egyptian priests, from hieroglyphic inscriptions carved by the workers themselves, from modern archaeological excavations that have uncovered worker villages and mass graves, from the medical examination of worker skeletons that show the injuries and diseases they suffered. This is the story of the men who built the pyramids, and the pharaohs who used them as expendable resources in pursuit of immortality. The pyramids, monuments to divine kings. To understand what was done to the workers, we must first understand what the pyramids were and why they were built. The pyramids of Egypt were not public works projects. They were not monuments to national pride. They were not symbols of Egyptian achievement. They were tombs. Specifically, they were tombs for pharaohs who believed they were living gods and who believed that when they died, they would ascend to the heavens and take their place among the eternal gods. The pyramid was not just a burial place. It was a machine for resurrection. The pharaoh's body would be mummified and placed in a burial chamber deep inside the pyramid. The pyramid's shape, pointing toward the sky, and was meant to help the pharaoh's soul climb to the heavens. The passages and chambers inside were designed according to religious texts to facilitate the pharaoh's journey through the underworld and his eventual rebirth as a god. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, also called the Pyramid of Cheops, is the largest of all Egyptian pyramids. It was built around 2550 BC during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. The statistics are staggering. The pyramid originally stood 146 meters tall, which is 480 feet, making it the tallest structure in the world for over 3,800 years. It's made of approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs 2.5 tons. Some of the granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh 80 tons. The base covers 13 acres. The 4 sides are aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, west. So with an accuracy of less than 1/10 of a degree. This level of precision required extensive surveying, planning, and mathematical calculation. And all of this was accomplished without iron tools, without the wheel for transportation, without pulleys, without any of the construction technology we consider basic today. How was it built? For centuries, this question fascinated historians. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in 450 BC, almost 2000 years after the pyramid was built, visited Egypt and asked Egyptian priests how the pyramids were constructed. They told him that 100,000 workers labored for 20 years to build the Great Pyramid. They told him the workers were organized into crews that rotated every 3 months so that no single group bore the full burden. They told him that enormous ramps were built to drag the stones up to higher levels as the pyramid grew. They told him that the workers were fed at the pharaoh's expense, receiving rations of bread, beer, onions, and occasionally meat. Herodotus recorded all of this in his histories, and for over 2000 years, his account was the primary source for understanding pyramid construction. Modern archaeology has confirmed much of what Herodotus wrote, while also correcting some details. Excavations in the 1990s, led by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass and American archaeologist Mark Lehner, uncovered the remains of worker villages near the pyramids at Giza. These villages housed the workers who built the pyramids. The archaeological evidence shows that the workers were not slaves in the way we typically understand the term. They were not foreigners captured in war and forced into labor. They were Egyptians. Most were farmers from the Nile Valley who came to work on the pyramids during the flood season when the Nile flooded their fields and they could not farm. This was a form of labor tax called corvée labor. Every Egyptian owed service to the pharaoh. For farmers, this meant spending several months each year working on state projects, primarily pyramid construction. Some workers were permanent employees, skilled craftsmen like stonemasons, carpenters, and engineers who worked year round and were paid wages. But the vast majority were temporary workers, farmers fulfilling their labor obligation. They were housed in worker villages, fed by the state, and organized into crews with names like Friends of Khufu and Followers of Khufu. These crew names have been found carved into the pyramid blocks themselves. Graffiti left by workers marking their contribution. The workers were paid, they were fed, they had some degree of organization and structure. But this does not mean conditions were good. This does not mean they were treated well. And this certainly does not mean the work was safe. The brutal reality of construction. The construction of the Great Pyramid required moving 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, from quarries to the construction site, and then raising them into position as the pyramid grew taller. The limestone blocks came from quarries right at Giza, relatively close to the construction site. But the granite blocks used in the king's chamber came from Aswan, 500 miles south. Thus, granite blocks, that weighing up to 80 tons each, had to be quarried, loaded onto boats, transported down the Nile, unloaded, and dragged to the pyramid site. The scale of this operation is almost impossible to comprehend. Modern estimates suggest that to complete the pyramid in 20 years, workers needed to set one block in place every 2 to 3 minutes, working 10 hours a day, every day, for 20 years. The pace was relentless. How were the blocks moved? The Egyptians did not have the wheel for heavy transport. They did not have pulleys. They had ropes, wooden sledges, and human muscle. The process worked like this. A block would be quarried using copper chisels and wooden wedges. The block would be shaped roughly at the quarry. It would then be loaded onto a wooden sledge, a flat platform with runners. So workers would pour water on the sand in front of the sledge to reduce friction. Then teams of workers, sometimes 20 men, sometimes 50, sometimes more for the largest blocks, would pull the sledge using thick ropes. They would drag the block from the quarry to the construction site. Once at the site, the block had to be raised. The most widely accepted theory is that the Egyptians built enormous ramps made of mud, brick, and rubble. As the pyramid grew taller, the ramps grew longer and higher. Workers would drag the blocks up these ramps. Some theories suggest a single large ramp. Others suggest multiple ramps spiraling around the pyramid. Still others suggest internal ramps within the pyramid structure itself. We do not know for certain, but we know ramps were used. Now imagine what this meant for the workers. Imagine dragging a 2.5-ton block of stone across the desert sand in 120-degree heat. Imagine pulling on ropes so heavy that they cut into your hands and shoulders. Imagine doing this for 10 to 12 hours a day. Imagine that if you slip, if you fall, if the rope breaks, the block could roll back and crush you or your crew members. Imagine doing this for months at a time. Imagine that there are no safety regulations, no protections, no compensation for injury, no medical care beyond the most basic treatment. This was the reality for pyramid workers. The archaeological evidence of worker skeletons tells us what this work did to their bodies. Skeletons excavated from worker cemeteries at Giza show evidence of severe physical trauma. Many skeletons have healed fractures, indicating that workers survived injuries and continued working. Many show signs of degenerative joint disease, particularly in the spine and knees, consistent with years of heavy labor. Many show signs of nutritional deficiencies despite the food rations, suggesting the rations were barely adequate for the physical demands. Many skeletons show evidence of occupational injuries, crushed vertebrae from carrying heavy loads, shattered leg bones from blocks falling on them, amputated fingers and hands, likely from accidents with tools or ropes. The skeletons of pyramid workers tell a story of bodies used up by labor, worn out before their time, broken by the weight of stone. And many did not survive at all. How many workers died building the Great Pyramid? Ancient sources do not give us exact numbers. Herodotus does not mention worker deaths. Egyptian records from the time are incomplete. But we can estimate based on what we know. If 100,000 workers were involved over 20 years, as Herodotus claims, and if mortality rates were consistent with pre-industrial labor projects of similar scale, we can estimate that between 20,000 and 40,000 workers died during the construction. That is 1 to 2 workers dying every single day for 20 years. Modern scholars tend toward the lower end of that estimate, around 20,000 to 30,000 deaths. But even this conservative estimate means that 1 out of every 4 or 5 workers who came to build the pyramid never went home. What killed them? Several factors. First, accidents. A 2.5-ton block of stone is unforgiving. If a rope breaks, if a sledge tips, if a worker loses his footing on a ramp, people die. The archaeological evidence shows that many workers suffered crush injuries. Second, saw exhaustion and heat. Working 10 to 12 hours a day in desert heat with inadequate hydration leads to heat stroke, dehydration, and death. Third, disease. When you house thousands of workers in close quarters with limited sanitation, disease spreads quickly. Excavations of worker villages show evidence of dysentery, parasitic infections, and other illnesses. Fourth, malnutrition. While workers were fed, the rations were calculated to be just enough to keep them working, not enough to keep them healthy long term. Fifth, lack of medical care. When a worker was injured, if the injury was severe, he was often simply left to die because treating him would take resources away from the construction project. The workers had names. One of the most haunting aspects of pyramid construction is that the workers left evidence of themselves. Throughout the pyramids, carved into blocks written in graffiti are the names of workers and work crews. These inscriptions are brief, simple, often just a name and a date, but they are profoundly human. They tell us that these were real people, not anonymous masses, not faceless slaves, but individuals who had names, who had identities, who wanted to be remembered. Inni the stone hauler, Nak the carpenter, Merer, who kept a papyrus journal documenting his work transporting limestone, the crew called Friends of Khufu, the crew called Followers of Khufu, the crew called the White Crown of Khufu is powerful. These names survive carved into stone. One of the most remarkable documents we have is the Diary of Merer, discovered in 2013 at the ancient port of Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast. This papyrus document dates to the reign of Khufu and records the daily activities of an inspector named Merer, who was responsible for transporting limestone blocks from the quarries to the pyramid construction site. The diary is written in hieratic script and covers several months of work. Merer records things like day 1 of the 3rd month of summer. Inspector Merer spends the day with his crew of 40 men transporting stones from the quarry at Tura to the pyramid site at Giza. The journey takes 1 day by boat. The crew unloads 30 blocks. Another entry reads day 23. The crew is delayed because the boat requires repairs. We do not work today. Another entry mentions that a crew member named Inis Nafru is ill and cannot work. The diary is mundane, bureaucratic, detailed, but it is evidence of real people doing real work. What makes these inscriptions and documents so powerful is what they reveal about how the workers saw themselves. They were not just laborers, they were participants in a sacred project. Building the Pharaoh's pyramid was not just a job, it was a religious duty. The Pharaoh was a god. Serving the god king was an honor. Many workers, perhaps most, believed that their labor would earn them favor in the afterlife. They believed that by helping the Pharaoh achieve resurrection, they would be rewarded by the gods. This is why crew names include phrases like friends of Khufu and followers of Khufu. They identified themselves as loyal servants of the divine king. This is why workers carved their names into blocks. They wanted the gods to see their contribution. They wanted to be part of something eternal. This makes their deaths all the more tragic. They were not forced at spear point to build the pyramids. Many came willingly. They believed the promises. They believed the pharaoh was divine. They believed that their sacrifice, their labor, their injuries, even their deaths had meaning. And for 20 years they hauled stone in the desert heat, and thousands of them died. And their bodies were thrown into mass graves, and the pyramid was completed, and the pharaoh was entombed in his granite chamber, and the workers went home to their villages, and the promise of eternal reward never materialized. The workers did not achieve immortality, they achieved anonymous death. The pharaoh achieved immortality. His name is known 4,500 years later. Khufu, Cheops, the builder of the Great Pyramid. But the men who actually built it, who moved every block, who carved every passage, who died by the thousands to make it possible, are forgotten, except for the few who carved their names, like Ini, whose name survives in the block that killed him. Specific documented cases. Archaeological evidence and ancient records give us glimpses of specific workers and what happened to them. Let us examine several documented cases. First, the workers of the village at Giza. Excavations led by Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner uncovered extensive remains of worker housing at Giza. The village could house approximately 20,000 workers at a time. The houses were small, simple structures made of mud brick. Workers slept in dormitory-style buildings, dozens of men to a room. The village included bakeries that could produce enough bread to feed the entire workforce, breweries that produced beer, so which was a staple of the Egyptian diet, and a large dining hall where workers ate communally. The village also included workshops for tool repair, areas for copper smelting to make new tools, and administrative buildings where scribes kept records. The cemetery associated with this worker village has been partially excavated. The burials are simple. Workers were buried in shallow graves with minimal grave goods. Some had a small pot or two, perhaps containing food for the afterlife. Some had amulets, but most were buried with nothing. This contrasts sharply with elite Egyptian burials, which included elaborate tombs, extensive grave goods, mummification, and religious texts. The workers who built monuments to immortality for the pharaoh received no such treatment themselves. The skeletal remains from this cemetery have been studied extensively. The bones tell stories of hard lives. One skeleton, identified as a male in his 30s, shows evidence of a severe spinal injury. Several vertebrae are crushed and healed in a deformed position. This injury would have caused chronic pain and limited mobility. Yet the healing indicates he survived for years after the injury. He continued living, possibly continued working, with a broken back. Another skeleton, a male in his 20s, shows evidence of an amputation. His right hand is missing, and the end of the radius and ulna show signs of healed bone, indicating the amputation was done while he was alive, and he survived. How did he lose his hand? An accident with tools, a rope injury, a block falling on it. We do not know. But we know he lost his hand while working on the pyramid and somehow survived. Another skeleton shows evidence of a skull fracture that healed. Another shows a shattered leg bone that was set and healed, though poorly, leaving the leg shorter than the other. Another shows evidence of a severe infection in the jaw, likely from an abscessed tooth that ate away part of the jawbone before the person died. These are the injuries that people survived. How many workers suffered injuries they did not survive? How many were crushed by blocks and died immediately? How many died from infections after injuries? How many died from heat stroke and exhaustion? Those bodies, if they were not thrown into mass graves at the work site, were sent home to their villages for burial and are scattered across Egypt, unidentifiable. Their connection to the pyramids lost to history. We also have evidence from papyrus documents. A papyrus fragment from the reign of Sneferu, Khufu's father, records an accident at a pyramid construction site. The text is damaged, but the readable portions state, "On the 15th day of the second month, a block of limestone fell from the ramp. 7 men were killed, 5 men were injured. The overseer reports to the vizier that work was delayed by 1 day. The names of the dead and injured are listed, though much of that portion of the papyrus is lost. What is striking about this document is its bureaucratic tone. 7 men died, work was delayed by 1 day. The vizier needed to know because delays affected the timeline and the budget. The men themselves were secondary, they were resources. When 7 resources were lost, it was noted in the records as an accounting matter. Another papyrus document, this one from the reign of Khufu, records food rations distributed to workers. The document lists quantities of bread, beer, onions, and occasional meat portions. Modern nutritionists who have analyzed these rations estimate they provided approximately 3,000 to 3,500 calories per day. which sounds adequate. But for men doing heavy physical labor for 10 to 12 hours a day in extreme heat, the actual caloric need would be closer to 4,500 to 5,000 calories per day. The rations were calculated to be just enough to keep workers alive and working, not enough to keep them healthy. Over months of this diet, combined with extreme labor, workers would have lost weight, lost muscle mass, become weak, and susceptible to disease. The Pharaoh fed his workers, but he fed them the minimum necessary to extract the labor. Why the Pharaohs did this? Why did the Pharaohs build the pyramids knowing it would cost tens of thousands of lives? Why did they organize such massive projects that consumed the resources and labor of an entire nation for decades? The answer lies in Egyptian religious beliefs and the nature of kingship in ancient Egypt. The pharaoh was not simply a political leader, he was a god incarnate. Egyptians believed that the pharaoh was the living embodiment of the god Horus during his lifetime, and that when he died, he became Osiris, the god of the dead and resurrection. The pharaoh's life, death, and rebirth were not personal matters. They were cosmic events that affected the entire universe. And if the pharaoh did not successfully complete his journey through the underworld and achieve resurrection, the cosmic order, which Egyptians called Maat, would collapse. The sun would not rise, the Nile would not flood, chaos would consume the world. The pyramid was therefore not a vanity project. It was essential to maintaining cosmic order. The pyramid was a machine designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful resurrection. Every passage, every chamber, every architectural detail had religious significance drawn from texts like the pyramid texts, which are among the oldest religious texts in the world. The pharaoh's body was mummified using elaborate rituals to preserve it for resurrection. The body was placed in the pyramid along with everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife, including food, clothing, furniture, servants, and sometimes even boats. The pyramid itself, with its massive weight pressing down, was meant to stabilize the burial chamber and protected it from grave robbers. The shape of the pyramid, pointing toward the heavens, was meant to facilitate the pharaoh's ascent to the sky. Given these beliefs, the pharaoh and his priests saw the construction of the pyramid as the most important task the nation could undertake. Everything else was secondary. The lives of individual workers, while not entirely meaningless, were simply less important than the cosmic necessity of completing the pyramid. If workers died, it was unfortunate but acceptable because their deaths served the greater purpose of ensuring the pharaoh's resurrection and thus maintaining the cosmic order that kept Egypt prosperous. This is how pharaohs justified the cost, and many workers, so indoctrinated into this religious worldview from birth, accepted it. They believed that by serving the god king, even at the cost of their own lives, they were doing something sacred. This is what makes the story of pyramid construction so complex. We cannot simply say the pharaohs were evil tyrants who enslaved innocent people. The reality is more nuanced. The pharaohs genuinely believed they were gods. The priests genuinely believed the pyramids were necessary for cosmic stability. The workers, or at least many of them, genuinely believed their labor was sacred service. And yet, the outcome was the same. Tens of thousands of people died building monuments to someone else's immortality. They were used even if they consented to being used. They were expendable even if they believed their expendability was noble. The system that created the pyramids was built on a foundation of religious belief so powerful that it convinced ordinary people to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of a ruling elite. The scale of death across all pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the most famous, but it is only one of approximately 138 pyramids that were built in Egypt over a period of roughly 1,000 years, from about 2700 BC to 1700 BC. Each of these pyramids required labor. Some were much smaller than Khufu's pyramid and required fewer workers, others were nearly as large. The Pyramid of Khafre, built by Khufu's son, is almost as massive. The Pyramid of Menkaure, built by Khufu's grandson, is smaller but still required tens of thousands of workers. During the 4th dynasty alone, which lasted about 120 years from approximately 2600 BC to 2480 BC, Egypt built at least 10 major pyramids, including the 3 at Giza. Each pyramid took 10 to 20 years to build, each employed tens of thousands of workers, each cost thousands of lives. If we estimate conservatively that each major pyramid cost 10,000 lives, and there were at least 30 major pyramids built during the Old and Middle Kingdoms, that is 300,000 deaths. If we estimate less conservatively, using the higher estimates of 30,000 to 40,000 deaths per pyramid for the largest pyramids, the total death toll across all pyramid construction could reach 500,000 to 1 million people over 1,000 years. These numbers are speculative because we do not have detailed death records, but they are consistent with what we know about the pre-industrial construction projects, mortality rates in ancient Egypt, and the physical evidence of worker injuries and diseases. Building the pyramids was one of the deadliest sustained projects in ancient history. More people died building pyramids than died in most ancient wars. And what did Egypt gain? The pyramids did not improve the lives of ordinary Egyptians. They did not make the nation wealthier or more secure. They did not advance technology or knowledge in ways that benefited society broadly. They served one purpose only: to ensure the resurrection of dead kings. The resources that went into pyramid construction, the labor, the food, the materials, the organization, could have been used for irrigation projects that would have increased agricultural productivity, for defensive fortifications that would have protected Egypt from invasion, and for trade expeditions that would have brought wealth to the nation. Instead, Egypt spent 1,000 years building elaborate tombs for its rulers, and ordinary Egyptians paid the price in sweat, injury, and death. The workers' villages, evidence of life and death. The archaeological excavations of worker villages at Giza and other pyramid sites have revolutionized our understanding of who built the pyramids and how they lived. Before these excavations in the 1980s and 1990s, many scholars believed the pyramids were built by slaves, possibly Hebrew slaves, based on biblical stories and later Greek and Roman writings. The discovery of the worker villages proved this wrong. The workers were Egyptians, mostly farmers fulfilling labor obligations, plus skilled permanent workers. They were housed in organized villages, fed by the state, and given medical care, however minimal, but the evidence from these villages also reveals how difficult their lives were. The village at Giza was large, capable of housing 20,000 workers. The housing was basic, dormitory style mud brick buildings with no privacy and minimal comfort. Workers slept on the floor or on simple reed mats. There was no furniture. Personal possessions were minimal. The village was organized around the work. The largest structures were not residential but industrial: the bakeries, the breweries, the tool workshops. The village existed solely to support pyramid construction. When the pyramid was finished, the village was abandoned. Excavations show that after the Great Pyramid was completed, the worker village at Giza was largely deserted until the next pyramid project began. The bakeries at Giza could produce thousands of loaves of bread per day. The breweries could produce thousands of liters of beer. The sheer scale of food production required to feed 20,000 workers working hard, physical labor is staggering. And yet, despite this industrial scale food production, the evidence suggests workers were often hungry. The skeletal remains show signs of nutritional stress. Some workers had dental problems consistent with a grain-heavy diet, including cavities and abscesses. The diet was monotonous: bread, beer, onions, and occasionally meat or fish. It provided calories but not necessarily balanced nutrition. Workers would have felt perpetually hungry, perpetually tired, perpetually worn down. The medical facilities at the worker villages were basic. There is evidence of what might have been an infirmary or medical station, but it was small. The Egyptians had some medical knowledge. They could set broken bones, they could perform amputations, they could treat infections with honey, which has natural antibacterial properties. But they had no concept of sterilization, no effective painkillers beyond beer and wine, no antibiotics. A worker with a serious injury faced a choice between amputation, which might save his life, but would end his ability to work, or death from infection. A worker with internal injuries from being crushed by a block had no real chance of survival. Medical care was available, but it was limited to what ancient technology could provide, which was not much. The cemeteries associated with worker villages tell the final chapter of the story. Workers who died were buried in simple graves near the village. The graves are not marked with elaborate monuments. The bodies were not mummified in most cases. They were simply wrapped in linen and placed in shallow pits. Some graves contain multiple bodies, suggesting either family burials or mass burials after particularly deadly accidents or disease outbreaks. The cemetery at Giza contains hundreds of burials, and it has not been fully excavated. How many workers lie in unmarked graves, their bones still buried in the sand, their names lost forever? We will never know the full count. The end of the Pyramid Age. The age of pyramid building in Egypt lasted roughly 1,000 years, but the Great Pyramids of the Old Kingdom, including Khufu's Great Pyramid, were built in a relatively short period during the 4th dynasty, in approximately 2600 BC to 2480 BC. After the 4th dynasty, pyramid building continued, but the pyramids became smaller and less ambitious. By the Middle Kingdom, around 2000 BC to 1700 BC, pyramids were still being built, but they were made of mud brick with stone casing rather than solid stone. They were cheaper, faster to build, and required fewer workers. By the New Kingdom, around 1500 BC onward, pharaohs stopped building pyramids altogether. Instead, they built hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings, underground chambers cut into rock cliffs designed to protect the pharaoh's burial from grave robbers. Why did pyramid building stop? Several factors. First, the sheer cost became unsustainable. Pyramid construction drained Egypt's resources and labor force. It diverted resources from other needs. Over time, the economic burden became too great. Second, religious beliefs evolved. The massive pyramid complexes of the Old Kingdom did not prevent grave robbers from breaking in and looting the treasures. By the New Kingdom, pharaohs realized that hidden tombs were more secure than massive, visible monuments. Third, political changes. The centralized power of the Old Kingdom pharaohs, who could command 100,000 workers for decades, declined over time. Later, pharaohs did not have the same absolute authority. Fourth, perhaps a recognition that the human cost was too high. This is speculative, but it is possible that after 1000 years of pyramid building, Egyptian society began to question whether the cost was worth it. The pyramids that were built stand today as monuments to human ambition and human suffering. They are among the most recognizable structures in the world, symbols of ancient Egyptian civilization. Tourists visit them by the millions every year. They are marvels of engineering, testaments to what human beings can accomplish with simple tools and enormous determination. But they are also monuments to a system that valued the immortality of one person over the lives of thousands. They are tombs built on foundations of bones. Conclusion: remembering the workers. Let us return to Ini, the stone hauler, whose name we know because he carved it into the block that killed him. Ini was 24 years old. He came from a village somewhere in the Nile Delta. He left behind a wife, whose name we do not know, and two children, whose names we do not know. He worked on the Great Pyramid during the 23rd year of Pharaoh Khufu's reign. He hauled stone blocks up ramps in the desert heat. He believed he was doing sacred work. He believed his labor would please the gods and the god king. He carved his name into stone because he wanted to be remembered as part of something eternal. 3 hours later, he was dead. His body was thrown into a mass grave. His family received no compensation. His children grew up without a father. His wife likely remarried or lived in poverty. Ini's contribution to the Great Pyramid is one block somewhere in the interior, bearing his name. That is his legacy. That is what he earned for his life. There were tens of thousands of men like Ini. Men whose names we do not know. Men who hauled stone until their backs broke. Men who dragged sledges until their shoulders dislocated. Men who died from heat stroke, from exhaustion, from falling stones. From infections, from 1,000 different ways that pre-industrial construction could kill you. They built the pyramids, not the pharaohs, not the architects, though the architects designed them. Not the priests, though the priests blessed them. The workers, the farmers, the haulers, the carvers, the men whose names were not recorded in official chronicles. Whose faces we cannot picture, whose voices we cannot hear. They are the ones who turned quarried stone into monuments that have lasted 4,500 years. And yet, when we look at the pyramids today, we call them the pyramids of Khufu, the pyramids of Khafre, the pyramids of Menkaure. We name them after the pharaohs who commissioned them, not after the workers who built them. This is the final injustice. The pharaohs achieved what they wanted. They achieved immortality. Their names are known thousands of years after their deaths. Their monuments are world famous. Tourists stand before the Great Pyramid and marvel at the achievement of Khufu. But Khufu did not build the pyramid. He ordered it built. He provided the resources taken from his subjects through taxes. He organized the labor conscripted from his people. He designed the religious program that justified the enormous cost, but he did not quarry a single block. He did not drag a single sledge. He did not haul a single stone up a single ramp. The actual work was done by people like Ini, and they are forgotten. What can we learn from the story of the pyramid workers? First, that great achievements often come at terrible human cost. The pyramids are magnificent, but they are also graveyards. Second, That systems of belief can be used to justify exploitation. The workers believed their labor was sacred, and that belief was used to extract their lives. Third, that history remembers the powerful and forgets the powerless. The pharaohs are immortal, the workers are anonymous. Fourth, that we should ask when we see monuments to greatness who paid the price, who died to make this possible, whose suffering is hidden beneath the marble and stone. And fifth, that remembering matters. The workers cannot be brought back. Their names, with rare exceptions like Ini, are lost, but we can choose to remember that they existed, that they mattered, that they were real people with families and hopes and lives, and that they died building monuments to someone else's glory. The pyramids stand in the desert 4,500 years after they were built, are monuments to the pharaohs who commanded their construction and monuments to the workers who died making it possible. When you see images of the Great Pyramid, when you hear about the wonders of ancient Egypt, remember Inar, the stone hauler, 24 years old, crushed by a 2.5-ton block of limestone, left to die over 3 days, buried in a mass grave, his name surviving only because he carved it into the stone that killed him. Remember that greatness has a price, and usually that price is paid by those who receive the least credit and the least reward. This is documented history from the writings of Herodotus, from ancient Egyptian papyrus records, from hieroglyphic inscriptions left by the workers themselves, from modern archaeological excavations at Giza and other pyramid sites, from the skeletal remains of workers that show the injuries and diseases they endured. This is the story of what the pharaohs did to the workers who built the pyramids. Remember the pyramids, but remember the workers who built them. Remember the cost, remember Ini.